In the olden times, there was a huge battle going on between the Israelites and the Philistines. And both armies were set up on either side of a valley, each about a day's walk away from the other. But the problem was that the Philistines had this huge giant warrior named Goliath, and he would come out every day in the morning and scream at the Israelites, "Hey, you guys suck. Send out your best warrior so we can have a fair one-on-one fight and decide this war once and for all." And he did this for 40 days straight, but no one from the Israelite army would step up to the challenge. That is until one day when a young boy named David heard Goliath's challenge and said, "Wait a minute, you big mean bully, why should the outcome of this whole war depend on whether some scaredy-cat warrior is willing to fight you? It's not like anyone even died or anything. No, I will go fight you right now, and I promise you, it's gonna be way more exciting than all those other boring fights." And before anyone could stop him, David ran all the way across the valley and met up with Goliath. But how exactly did this little kid defeat such a big, scary giant? Well, that's what I'll explain right after. Thousands of years ago, there was an epic battle taking place between the Israelites and their sworn enemies, the Philistines. These two groups had been fighting each other for decades, but the problem was that the Philistines had a huge advantage. And it wasn't just because they had bigger armies or better weapons or anything like that. No, their secret weapon was a warrior named Goliath. And he really was a force to be reckoned with, because Goliath wasn't just a normal guy. See, he was a giant, standing over 9 feet tall. And every morning for 40 days straight, he would come walking out from the Philistine camp and yell as loud as he possibly could, "Hey, Israelites, you guys totally suck. Send out your biggest, baddest warrior so I can smash him to smithereens and finally put an end to this stupid war once and for all." And to prove that he wasn't just an empty-headed meathead, Goliath would also boast, "I guarantee that whoever wins this fight will end up winning the entire war. So if you want your nation to keep existing, then send someone out to fight me right away." But unfortunately, no one from the Israelite army was brave enough to accept Goliath's challenge. That is until one day when the Israelite king named Saul got fed up with all his scaredy-cat soldiers and decided that he needed to do something drastic. So he gathered everyone together and announced, "Okay, soldiers, since none of you are willing to fight this giant, I hereby decree that whoever defeats Goliath will receive a reward. Wait right here while I go tell my armorer to find someone who can fit in my royal armor. And hopefully that person will be a good fighter, because if they are, I'll give them the reward." And sure enough, after trying on the armor, a man named Ishbi-Benob found that he could fit inside, and so he became the official recipient of the reward. But the problem was that Ishbi was actually afraid of Goliath, and so he refused to go fight him, which meant that King Saul still hadn't solved his problem. But luckily for him, just at that moment, a young boy named David came running over and overheard what was going on. And although David was just a simple shepherd, he knew that he had to do something to help his people. And so he volunteered to take on Goliath, even though he didn't have any armor or weapons, and even though he was just a small skinny kid. In fact, David wasn't even in the Israelite army. He was just there because he had been sent by his dad to bring food to his 8 older brothers who were all fighting on the front lines. And now that those brothers heard that their youngest sibling was going to fight the giant, they were absolutely furious. They told David that he was going to get himself killed, but David didn't care because he was way more worried about the safety of his people than his own personal well-being. And after hearing this, King Saul hesitantly agreed to let David try his luck against Goliath, although he thought that it was probably going to end badly. And sure enough, when David went to go fight the giant, it looked like he didn't stand a chance. Goliath laughed at the sight of such a tiny kid charging towards him, and he taunted David by saying, "You must be pretty brave charging into battle with nothing but a slingshot. But I've got some news for you, little kiddo. This isn't gonna be nearly as fun as that cartoon you watched where the slingshot took down an elephant or whatever. 'Cause I am much bigger and stronger than any elephant, and your little slingshot ain't gonna do squat against me. Ha ha, I win." And with that, Goliath threw his spear at David, but the boy dodged out of the way, picked up the spear, and threw it back at the giant. But again, Goliath just laughed and swatted the spear away like it was made out of toothpicks. But David wasn't giving up yet because he had a trick up his sleeve. After all, as a shepherd, he spent lots of time practicing his slingshot skills to protect his flock from predators like wolves and bears. And so even though David was smaller than Goliath, he trusted that his skills with a slingshot were good enough to hit the giant. And in order to make sure he had the best chance of winning, David refused to wear any of King Saul's armor, even though it was offered to him. He said that the armor was too heavy and uncomfortable, and he knew that if he wanted to win this fight, he needed to be as nimble and quick as possible. And besides, David felt confident that his trusty slingshot was all the weapon he needed. So, he adjusted his cloak, grabbed his sling and 5 smooth stones he picked up from a stream, and started charging towards the giant. And even though Goliath continued to laugh and taunt the entire time, David stayed focused. He knew that this was his one shot to save his people, and he wasn't going to waste it. And soon enough, David was close enough to Goliath that he could feel the giant as hot stinky breath on his face. But instead of panicking, David stood his ground, closed one eye, and took aim. Then with all the strength he had, he swung his sling and let loose the first stone. And right as the crowd watched in suspense, the stone smacked right into the giant's forehead and knocked him clean out. At that moment, David felt like the strongest person in the entire world. He charged forward, grabbed Goliath's giant sword, and ran back to his feet. Then without even hesitating, David plunged the sword into the giant's neck and ended his life. And that, my friends, was the moment that everything changed, because from that day forward, the Israelites won every battle against the Philistines. And as for David, well, he eventually became the most powerful king Israel had ever seen. And it all started when a young shepherd stood up to a giant and won. But now I want to hear from you. How do you think David managed to win against such a big, scary giant? And what's your favorite Bible story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as a reward for sticking around until the very end, here's a fun fact. Did you know that the average human brain has around 86 billion neurons, which means that there are roughly 86 billion little parts of your brain that can be used to think cool thoughts? And that's pretty cool if you ask me. But now it's time for you to go. So go be awesome, and I'll catch you next time.